Hi there, and welcome back to our Seed World Pro Power Talk. Today, I am excited to be joined by John Duff, and we're going to be talking about a couple different topics. At the top of the list is water, sustainability, stewardship, and climate credits or carbon credits, and how all of these things come together. And then sorghums tie into that and what John is seeing. So first, let me introduce you to John. John Duff serves as the Strategic Business Director for the National Sorghum Producers. And in that role, he provides analysis of different farm policies, crop insurance, and ethanol regulatory issues. He also works with the Sorghum Checkoff and the National Sorghum Producers subsidiaries, Elite Ag Management, and Sustainable Crop Insurance Services. John, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from and what's your background?
Yep, absolutely. First off, thanks for giving me the opportunity to visit with your viewers, readers, listeners, Julie. This is one of the most important industry groups that we work with in terms of the seed industry. So it really all does start with the seed, and so it's great to visit with the seed industry. I'm from the Lubbock area, actually. So I live and work in Lubbock, Texas, with National Sorghum Producers. I'm from west of here, about 25 minutes. So it's pretty quick from my apartment. Parking lot to my parents' house is about 25 minutes. So it's easy to go home to the farm whenever I need to be on the tractor, which this year was halfway through harvest. Dad wiped out in the backyard, didn't even have a good story, but blew out his knee. And so I had to go help with harvest. And so I'm blessed to be able to do that. Dad farms predominantly cotton, sorghum as well. He is going to put his 44th crop in this year. So really proud, long ag background for my family in West Texas. Have worked now with National Sorghum Producers for about 8 years in various capacities. Started as an intern before I graduated from Texas Tech, which is here in Lubbock, and have been here ever since. And with any luck, they will wheel me out of this place on a stretcher, and then I will work from my phone until they take it away from me in the hospital. So it's a great place to work, phenomenal industry, and I'm really blessed to be a part of it.
That's fantastic. I heard you speak in Kansas City. And so that's when I had first approached you about possibly coming and speaking for Seed World Pro, but you had talked about the topic of sorghum was kind of your primary presentation, or what you were talking crop specific, but you really hit upon a number of issues that I think are so relevant to the seed industry. And so the first one of those was water, and why water use, water availability, water, the cleanliness, and we talked about runoff. All of those things come together at the farm level, at the seed industry level, and from an agronomic perspective, and providing recommendations to farmers in terms of the practices that they're using. So how did you kind of come into this topic, or to this presentation? If you give us a little bit of background, and then why it's important for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say that my background in this area is it's interesting. It's been quite a journey in sustainability over the last really decade for the sorghum industry. So in 2011, or 2012, I was still an intern at National Sorghum Producers and the Sorghum Checkoff, sister organizations both here in Lubbock, of course. And we put on a renewables conference in Denver, and we did that before I graduated. It was April of 2012, and we had a great time getting the speaker lineup together. We had any and everybody that wanted to talk, that needed to talk, that were delivering messages that we needed to hear, except sustainability. And it was just the most bewitching thing, because it was very difficult to get a speaker on a topic that we thought should be a home run, because it's sorghum, right? Sorghum is drought tolerant. It's It is predominantly no-till. It checks a lot of boxes related to sustainability, but we just couldn't find a speaker for this important topic. And I mean, it was literally, it was the very end before we finally got it resolved. And when I mean the very end, I mean the very end. I was not even graduated yet, and I'm sitting here with the last speaker, and I am at the table where I was running the PowerPoint slides, and we were 10 minutes from this guy getting on stage, a guy we didn't know that had come to us from, friend of a contact, of a colleague, that came to us to talk about sustainability, and he wasn't answering his phone or email or text. And it's 10 minutes before he goes on, and I'm sitting there. Like I said, I haven't graduated yet, so I'm trying to prove myself. And he finally shows up, and it was all okay. But it just goes to show you our journey with sustainability has been tough, and it's been going for a decade now. We kind of had a wake up call the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years when we started having some issues with carbon intensity in the California low carbon fuels market. They made some changes to the way they calculate their carbon intensity, and they went to a new data set that didn't treat sorghum so well, and it was a real problem. We were facing losing the California market for the ethanol plants. And in the California market, if your carbon intensity score is not below a certain threshold, you just can't sell your fuel out there. It's not really a matter of discounting. It's just you can't sell your fuel. And so we had to scramble and work really hard to come up with some data. And we worked with the California Air Resources Board and the Argonne National Lab and some other entities to work through this issue. And we finally got it addressed. Fortunately, we're still in the California market. It's still a really good market for us, but it really was the wake-up call that we've got to do something. And so that kind of started our journey the last few years in sustainability, and it's culminated with the Sorghum Checkoff now is working to hire a sustainability director. We've got some programming funds that the board just approved last week, actually, at the Sorghum Checkoff board meeting here in Lubbock, and we're really excited about moving forward with that position.
And so, so you kind of made it over the hurdle of keeping sorghum ethanol in California, and making sure that that was an avenue that stayed there. But what during that kind of wake up call, one of your focuses was on water. When you look at sustainability and water use, and let's talk about the requirements of a plant in relationship to water.
Yep, absolutely. So there's a couple things when we talk about water that are important. There's the water quality piece and then the water quantity piece. And water quality or water quantity is one that, again, we kind of took for granted in the sorghum industry for a long time. Sorghum uses a third less water than corn. It uses half the water that corn silage does. It'll just shut down during a drought. It's heat tolerant. It has so much pollen that you don't have to worry about pollen viability as much. And so it's a good crop from a water perspective. And we just kind of assumed that everybody would know that. And we wondered for a long time why a lot of those messages weren't really taking hold. And we think that they will in the future. So the world's grain crop is 40% irrigated, which is really scary if you think about it. But we think that they will be big in the future. But kind of more important today are these water quality discussions. And again, it was one of those that at first we kind of thought, hey, you know what, how do we play in that? How do we fit? And then when you really start digging into the numbers, soil health equals water quality. So if you take care of the soil, if you keep nitrogen on that ground and you don't let it leach and you don't let it run off and you no-till it and you use as few pesticides and herbicides as possible, that necessarily is going to help water quality improve. So they go hand in hand. And lo and behold, when you put those numbers related to soil health into carbon intensity calculators, your carbon intensity score improves as well when you're taking those steps to keep the soil healthy and to keep water healthy, that really looks good in the carbon intensity models as well. So you're killing a 3 or 4 birds with one stone here in effect when you look at things like water quality. And so that's where our water discussions kind of started, and then that's where they've kind of ended in how we're working on that issue now.
Hmm. And you mentioned soil health, and that is such a hot topic right now. We see a lot of companies, a lot of NGOs, and even government agencies investing resources and dollars and time into better understanding soil health and helping farmers to adopt practices to improve soil health. And I think from an industry standpoint, taking care of the soil and better understanding the soil microbiome and how that and that relationship with the seed and the crop is really believed to take us, to break through that next yield barrier. What are you seeing in terms of soil health and in the stewardship component of it?
So we're seeing a lot. I'd say sorghum farmers are probably some of the most proactive farmers in the world when it comes to soil health, U.S. sorghum farmers in particular. So if you look at where sorghum is grown and then you overlay that with a map of the Dust Belt of the Dust Bowl, it's depressing. I think is probably the best word for it. We have got to take care of the soil out of necessity. We just don't have a choice in the sorghum belt. And in fact, it's funny because I've got the Sorghum Smart Talk podcast. We're recording a Christmas episode special here after I get off this call with you. And Terry Swanson is an old sorghum chairman from Baca County, Colorado, that is going to be on, and he's a longtime sorghum producer in Baca County, and that was technically the epicenter, the geographic center of the Dust Bowl. And it's a stalwart sorghum county. He's a stalwart sorghum grower, and we're right in that country that we have no choice. So you see that when you look at no-till numbers. So sorghum farmers and sorghum acres are 74% conservation tillage. So that's the highest percentage in among U.S. crops when you look at practices for at different practices across crops. So sorghum farmers are doing a good job. Try to leave it undisturbed as much as possible. And we also rotate a lot as well. So we've got a couple million acres every year that are rotated with wheat. We still have a couple million acres a year that are rotated with a fallow period. We've got rotations with soybeans. We rotations with corn. A lot of cotton rotations on the Gulf Coast. And I think that the instance of sorghum on sorghum is just so low from a stewardship perspective, soil health perspective. It just makes sense to take care of the environment from a sorghum belt perspective. So we see a lot of no-till and of good soil health practices in the sorghum industry. And like I said, that's a great thing, because if we can quantify those things and really put numbers to them, then it looks great in the carbon intensity models and allows us to tell a really good story, whether it's to regulators, to consumer groups, to NGOs, to international organizations like the UN. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for U.S. agriculture there.
Hmm. What about on the carbon sequestration side of things? So we know that there's above ground growth to the plant, but then you also have just as much, if not more, biomass below ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Pure and simple, if you're making 10,000 pounds of grain above the ground in an ear or a head or whatever, you have to have 10,000 pounds of stock and leaf to support that. And then you have to have 20,000 pounds below the ground in order to support that. And of that, about 40% is carbon. So pretty quickly, if you've got 10,000 pounds of grain above the ground, it's a pretty safe bet that you've got about 8,000 pounds of carbon that stays below the ground. And a lot of that is stable. It's going to be held tight in a way that it will stay there and is actually sequestered. We've got a long way to go to really demonstrate that to environmental markets, to consumer groups, to low carbon fuel markets. We have a long way to go to really demonstrate that, quantify it, and then demonstrate it. But the story is very strong, and the scientific case is very, very compelling, and will probably only get more compelling in the future.
What is the path forward there? How are you guys planning to address that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So we're taking a really multi-pronged approach. So National Sorghum Producers launched a partnership with the Natural Resources Conservation Service uh, earlier this year, and that will take place over the next couple of years, and that will really be devoted to really benchmarking and getting a good, solid number for farm practices today, predominantly in sorghum, but in other crops grown in the sorghum belt as well. We also signed on to a DOE grant along these lines that will be significantly larger, that will be predominantly focused on collecting this information remotely. So think satellite imagery, drones, um, something called the eddy covariance tower that I'd never heard of before, that actually measures the flux of nitrogen off the soil, and measuring all those things remotely, so that one day in the future, sorghum farmer is going to be able to access an online dashboard where all this information is going to be collected for him, and he'll just be able to easily turn that over to regulators or others in the supply chain that want to see those numbers. So we're a part of that, and I think that will be a really groundbreaking uh, piece of science, I think, or series of scientific breakthroughs that'll come out of that project. And we're really excited about what that looks like. Beyond that, we just continue to work with NGO groups, with state governments, with the federal government, with international governments and groups on really demonstrating what we're doing, and working to figure out how ultimately the market is going to pay for those practices, and have them accrued back to the farmer.
What I was going to say is there, when you think about the value chain up and downstream, what role do you see the seed industry playing, or seed companies?
Yeah, so I'd say uh, again, I think the most important thing in this is probably soil health. So the first thing I would say to seed companies is don't get bogged down when it comes to talking about sustainability and worrying about the definition, what it means, all these things. When it comes right down to it, it's about soil health. And so I think the main thing that seed companies need to focus on when they're thinking about this is practically how they can help in the soil health movement. Again, because ultimately, if you're keeping nitrogen on the field, if you're no-tilling, if you're putting down less pesticides, less herbicides, those are good for the farmer's pocketbook. They're good for the soil. They're good for the water, and they're good in the carbon intensity models. And those are win-win-wins for a number of different people. So I'd say the focus from the seed company perspective needs to be on soil health. It needs to be improving the crop in ways that will contribute to healthy soils. And the other thing, it's a little bit out of the sorghum seed realm, but cover crops. So I think cover crops have a significant role to play in this area, and any seed companies that have big investments or big interest or big connections into cover crops, it's only going to be a bigger deal. And I think there's going to be more and more opportunities for seed companies in cover crops, because they can demonstrate carbon sequestration and soil health by having cover crops out there over the ground. So those are the two big areas I think that the seed industry really needs to be thinking about as it relates to sustainability.
hmm And when we look at the kind of early models of carbon credits, and kind of connecting the from the people looking to buy carbon credits to those that are have credits to offer, how are some of those early models playing out and working? And what is your take on those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that first, the low carbon fuel markets are really the most low hanging fruit with regard to monetizing carbon, and those are not going away at all. They're low hanging fruit that are here. There's value. There was value 10 years ago. They were the first. There's going to be value in 10 years, and those are only growing. So we've got them in California. Uh, it's now enacted in Oregon. We had a near miss. We'll probably get one pretty soon in Washington. There's one coming in Colorado. We have one in British Columbia that will soon spread to the rest of Canada. And the hope is that the California, Oregon, soon to be Washington, and Canada plans will be fungible and able to be monetized and traded across the entire system. There's also low carbon fuel standard discussions going on in the Northeast. I actually think some of those states are probably already there without a lot of headlines because their demand is much lower for fuel. But there's also a lot of Midwest low carbon fuel standard discussions coming. Uh, Increasingly, I think Midwest governments, Midwest groups are going to look to the federal renewable fuel standard and say, it's not enough. It's not working. It's a regulatory mess. We fight with EPA all the time. So forget it. Let's just start our own. And I think you'll see those discussions happen more and more in the upper Midwest. I think there will be great results. You also see those in Colombia, Japan, the European Union, China. There are an increasing number of low carbon fuel standards, and there will continue to be opportunities there. So that's the first thing. Beyond that, we always get farmers calling and saying, I got somebody that wants to buy carbon credits from me, and what do you make of it? Is it real? Is there a market? Why are they doing it? How are they doing it? How can they make this work? And what I tell them is well, I don't know about this specific company. Who knows? But I will say that there are people buying carbon credits. So probably 10 years ago, there were dairies that they put digesters up and they started collecting methane.
Mm-hmm.
And they were generating carbon credits through the clearinghouse. And the carbon credits that were being bought 10 years ago and still today were being bought by Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, large tech companies. Why they're doing that? No idea. Are they worried about regulation? Probably. Are they demonstrating gains in sustainability to stakeholders? Probably. Uh, are they do they just philosophically believe this from a management perspective? Probably. I think a combination of all those things means that there is a pretty big value for carbon credits out there. Now, can a farmer just call one of these companies up and say, can I sell you carbon credits? No, not at this time. But the fact that you do have millions and millions being spent by these companies on carbon credits means there's a market out there for them.
Mm-hmm. And yesterday we talked a little bit about why are we having this conversation? Why is it important, and why do we need to have a seat at the table when we look at these things?
Yeah, so picture's worth 1,000 words, and you saw my slides at Kansas City, and the one I really want to highlight now is the slide of the fish washed up on shore by this green wave of algae uh, in Lake Erie. So every year you have algae bloom concerns in Lake Erie that kills fish. You have a dead zone in the Gulf that was one of the largest ever this year. You have the Des Moines Waterworks case. You've got all kinds of local water quality issues that are kind of rising up out there. And now, is there some concern related to agricultural runoff? Absolutely. Is it overblown? Possibly. If ag is not at the table when some of those judgments get handed down, when some of those decisions are made, are we going to be in big trouble? Absolutely. So I think the key is being at the table in discussions like this. We have got to be at the table. The fact is, a corn plant that gets 15 feet tall and is sequestering 5, 6, 7 tons of carbon below the ground, and farmers that are increasingly no-tilling and using seed that's yielding more and more every year, and using time-release nitrogen, using just-in-time practices that minimize the impact on waterways. The fact is on balance, what ag is giving back to the environment is far outweighs anything that we're taking from the environment or any bad environmental consequences. And we've just got to be at the table. And if we're not at the table during those discussions, we're going to have real issues in continuing to farm to the high level of productivity that we're used to of the past decade or so. So ag's got to be at the table. I think there's more to gain than there is to lose if we're at the table. If not, I really worry about it. But that's why I was really excited to visit with the seed group in Kansas City and to visit with you today, because it's an important issue that I think we all have to work together on. And one common thing that that all farmers have is they're planting seed that's coming from people that are watching and listening to this right now. And so, from a seed perspective, uh, your viewers are touching every farmer in the U.S. That's a significant responsibility y'all have to coordinate messaging across farmers, and I think it's a great opportunity and one that I'm excited to see the seed industry get more involved in these discussions.
It is a great opportunity and one that I know our listeners take seriously, and they are very proud of their contributions and in working closely with the farmers on some of these issues. And so I think one of the things that you mentioned that is really important to highlight is that these conversations are not meant to scare anybody or to be intimidating and say gosh, these darn regulations just keep coming, and feel like you're being pummeled over and over again. But it is really to say that agriculture and farmers and the seed industry, we have a very positive story to tell. There's a lot of good things happening, and there are some really cool innovations coming down the pipeline with the research that's being done around soil health, some of the market momentum around the carbon credits, and corporate America, or the corporate world looking to reduce their footprint, and partnering up with farmers is one way that they can do that. And so I think just that recognition is a huge step forward. So
I agree. I think you said it very well. Everyone needs to be cognizant of these issues and try to find a way that they can contribute to the debate and the conversation. And if we can all get on message and work in that direction, I think the story is very good. And ag has a lot more to gain than to lose if we're telling the story that we should and telling it correctly.
super. Well, John, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing this information on sustainability. Is kind of the big topic, I guess, is the way to frame it up, with our members and our readers. So appreciate that. To our members, we hope that you have found this information fun, inspiring, and that it gives you a bit of a different perspective. So that's it for today's Pro Talk. Thanks so much, and we hope you have a fantastic day.